Giant Cowboy begged the widow. The 7-foot giant collapsed to his knees on Magnolia Fairweather's porch. His massive frame shaking as tears carved rivers through the dust on his weathered face. Blood stained his knuckles from punching the oak tree in her yard, and his voice cracked like thunder when he spoke. "Ma'am, I buried my little Rosebud this morning, shot by rustlers who thought she was me in the dark." Boone Steelheart's words came out broken, each syllable a struggle. "I can't. Go home to that empty cabin. Can't think straight. Will you let me work your land for nothing, just to keep my hands busy before I do something I'll regret?" Magnolia stood frozen in her doorway, flour dusting her black mourning dress. She'd been a widow for 3 years, ever since the fever took her husband, and no man had dared approach her property since. But this broken giant wasn't like other men. His pain radiated from him in waves she recognized too well. "Stand up," she whispered, then louder. "Stand up, Boone Steelheart." He looked up, surprised. She knew his name. Everyone in Willowbend knew. The legendary tracker. The man who could read stories in hoofprints and catch outlaws with his bare hands. What they didn't know was that he had a daughter, a secret he'd kept to protect her from his enemies. "Your fence needs mending," Magnolia said simply. "The chicken coop roof is caving in, and my well's been giving me trouble." She stepped aside. "You can sleep in the barn. I'll feed you, but I won't coddle you." That first night, she heard him sobbing through the barn walls, deep soul-wrenching sounds that made her chest ache. She'd lost her own child to stillbirth 4 years ago, and the hollow echo of his grief called to something buried deep inside her. By dawn, he was already working, attacking her broken fence with the fury of a man trying to outrun his demons. His shirt came off in the morning heat, revealing scars that told stories of a hard life. Magnolia found herself watching from her kitchen window, coffee growing cold in her hands. "Fool woman," she muttered to herself, but couldn't look away. When she brought him lunch, he was installing new hinges on her chicken coop with surgical precision. His huge hands surprisingly gentle. "You don't have to," he started. "I know what I have to do," she cut him off. "And right now, I have to feed a man who's working himself to death on my property." They ate in silence under her apple tree, the weight of their shared grief settling. Between them, like a bridge neither was ready to cross. But when a hawk circled overhead, both looked up at the same moment. And their eyes met with an understanding that words couldn't touch. "She was only 16, he said suddenly. "Smart as a whip. Wanted to be a teacher." "What was her real name?" Magnolia asked softly. "Clementine. But she giggled like a little rosebud when she was happy, so—" His voice broke again. Magnolia reached across the space between them and touched his scarred knuckles. The contact sent electricity through both of them. It's dangerous and necessary as lightning. 3 weeks into their arrangement, the first real storm hit Willowbend, and everything changed. Magnolia woke to find her barn door banging open, rain flooding in. She grabbed her shawl and ran outside, expecting to find Boone Gonman, always left when things got difficult. Instead, she found him standing in the middle of the storm face, turned up to the sky, letting the rain wash over him like baptism. Lightning illuminated his massive frame, and she realized he wasn't running from his grief anymore. He was dancing with it. "Boone," she called over the thunder. He turned, rain streaming down his face, and she saw something wild and beautiful. In his eyes, she loved storms. He shouted back. "Used to sneak out and dance in them when I wasn't looking." Without thinking, Magnolia stepped into the rain. It soaked through her nightgown instantly, plastering her auburn hair to her skull. But she didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. They stood facing each other in the downpour. Two broken people, letting the storm strip away their careful walls. When Boone held out his enormous hand, she took it without hesitation. They didn't dance so much as sway together, letting the rain and wind move them in ways they'd forgotten how to move themselves. "I haven't felt anything in 3 years," she confessed, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I thought I never would again," he replied, pulling her closer. The kiss happened as naturally as lightning follows thunder. His lips were gentle. Despite his size, tasting of rain and possibility, when they broke apart, Both were trembling, but not from cold. "This is dangerous," Magnolia whispered. "Good," Boone said fiercely. "I'm tired of safe." The next morning brought complications. Reverend Blackthorne arrived with the church ladies, horrified to find Magnolia's undergarments hanging on the line alongside a man's clothes. The scandal spread through Willow Bend faster than wildfire. "That woman's brought shame on decent folk," declared Prudence Crowfeather, the banker's wife. "Living in sin with that savage?" But Magnolia had found something worth fighting for. When the church committee came to lecture her about proper behavior, they found her standing beside Boone as he repaired her roof, both of them radiating a quiet strength that made the gossips stumble over their rehearsed speeches. "Magnolia Fairweather," Reverend Blackthorne intoned, "this man is living in your barn like some sort of ... animal." "This man," Magnolia replied coolly, "has worked harder in 3 weeks than my late husband did in 3 years. And if you have something to say about my character, Reverend, you can say it to both of us." Boone climbed down from the roof, his presence suddenly filling the space. At 7 feet tall, he towered over everyone, but it was the protective way. He positioned himself beside Magnolia that made the committee take an involuntary step back. "Ma'am's been nothing but Christian kindness to a grieving man," he said quietly. "Anyone suggesting otherwise might want to consider what their own grief made them do." That evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, Magnolia felt the walls she'd built around her heart crumbling completely. "They'll try to drive you away," she warned. "Let them try," Boone said, taking her hand in his massive one. "I've found something worth staying for." The town's campaign against them began in earnest when Mayor Cornelius Nightshade declared that Boone's presence was disturbing the moral fabric of our community. But their efforts only pushed Magnolia and Boone closer together, creating an set into some world's intimacy that burned hotter than scandal. It was Magnolia who made the first bold move. On a sweltering July afternoon, as Boone worked shirtless in her garden, she appeared beside him with a basin of cool water and a washcloth. Without a word, she began washing the sweat and dirt from his shoulders, her touch sending shivers through his powerful frame despite the heat. "Magnolia," he warned, his voice rough with desire, "people are watching." "Let them watch," she said defiantly, her hands exploring the landscape of scars across his back. Each mark told a story of violence survived, of a man who'd lived hard, and somehow kept his heart intact. "I'm tired of living for other people's comfort." When he turned to face her, the washcloth forgotten, the air between them crackled with electricity. His hands found her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones as if memorizing her features. "You sure about this, darling? Once we cross this line, there's no going back." Her answer was to pull his head down and kiss him with 3 years of pent-up longing. They stumbled into her kitchen, hands desperate and searching, knocking over chairs and scattering flour in their wake. On her kitchen table, where she'd eaten lonely meals for so long, they finally surrendered to the fire that had been building between them. Their lovemaking was wild and tender, desperate and reverent. Boone worshipped her body like a man discovering religion, while Magnolia claimed him with a fierceness that surprised them both. When they lay tangled together afterward, hearts hammering against each other, they both knew they'd found something worth any price. "I love you," Boone whispered against her hair, the words torn from somewhere deep inside him. "God help me. I didn't think I could ever feel this again." "I love you too," she replied, tracing the scar over his heart. "But loving you feels like jumping off a cliff, and we'll jump together," he said, and sealed the promise with another kiss. Their newfound intimacy couldn't be hidden. The way Boone's eyes followed Magnolia's every movement, the way she blushed when he smiled at her, the way they seemed to exist in their own private world, it all scandalized and fascinated the townspeople. In equal measure, the breaking point came when Deputy Marshal Flint Ironwood rode into town with news that made Boone's blood run cold. "The Viper gang's been asking questions about you, Stuart. Word is they're coming to finish what they started with your daughter." Magnolia watched Boone transform before her eyes, the gentle man who'd held her so tenderly becoming something harder and infinitely more dangerous. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Maybe a week, maybe less." Ironwood's eyes flicked to Magnolia. "They know about her too now," he Staying here puts her in the crosshairs. That night, Boone sat on the edge of her bed, head in his hands. I have to leave, he said quietly. I won't bring that evil to your door. But Magnolia was done being afraid. No, she said firmly. We face this together, or we don't face it at all. The Viper Gang rode into Willowbend on a Tuesday morning like death itself. 7 hardened killers led by Snake Eye Morrison, the man who'd murdered Boone's daughter in cold blood. They made camp at the abandoned mill outside town, sending word that they wanted Boone's steel heart delivered to them by sunset, or they'd burn Willowbend to the ground. The town council met in emergency session, and their decision was swift and cowardly. Turn him over, Mayor Nightshade declared. One man isn't worth risking the whole town. But when they came for Boone, they found Magnolia standing guard on her porch with her late husband's rifle, eyes blazing with maternal fury. The first man who sets foot on my property dies, she announced calmly, and the second and the third. Behind her, Boone appeared in the doorway, his own weapons strapped on. Appreciate the sentiment, darling, but this is my fight, our fight, she corrected, never taking her eyes off the nervous delegation. You think I'd let you face them alone? To everyone's surprise, old Doc Brennigan stepped forward from the crowd that had gathered. Count me in, the grizzled physician said, hefting an ancient shotgun. Snake Eye Morrison killed my nephew in Kansas. I've got a score to settle. One by one, others joined them. Blacksmith Jeremiah Copperfield, whose daughter had been assaulted by one of Morrison's men, widow Patience Goldstream, whose husband had died trying to stop the gang's last rampage. Even quiet Tobias Flintridge, the schoolteacher, appeared with a rifle and grim determination. This is madness, sputtered Mayor Nightshade. You'll all be killed. Maybe, admitted Doc Brennigan, but some things are worth dying for. And some people are worth living for. As the sun climbed higher, the unlikely band of defenders prepared for war. Magnolia moved through them like an angel of battle, distributing ammunition and bandages with equal efficiency. When she reached Boone, he caught her hand. Something happens to me, he began. Nothing's going to happen to you, she interrupted fiercely, because I won't let it. The attack came at high noon, when the sun was directly overhead in shadows. Offered no concealment. Morrison's gang rode hard toward the center of town, guns blazing, expecting to find cowering shopkeepers and frightened families. Instead, they rode into a carefully prepared crossfire. Boone had positioned his defenders with military precision, turning Willowbend's main street into a killing ground. The battle was swift and brutal. Gun smoke filling the air as bullets flew in both directions. Magnolia fought like a woman possessed, her rifle finding its mark again and again. When a gang member flanked their position and drew down on Boone, her shot took him clean off his horse before he could fire. But Morrison was a survivor, cunning and vicious. As his men fell around him, he spotted the real prize, the womanhood, turned his quarry into something worth protecting. With a cruel smile, he spurred his horse toward Magnolia's position. Boone saw the danger and ran, but he was too far away. Morrison's gun swung toward the woman he loved, and time seemed to slow, to a crawl. In that crystalline moment, Boone understood what his daughter had felt in her final seconds. The terrible helplessness of watching death approach someone you love. The shot that rang out wasn't Morrison's. Deputy Marshal Ironwood lowered his smoking rifle as Morrison toppled from his saddle, a look of surprise frozen on his snake-marked face. Should have stayed in Kansas, the lawman said quietly in the aftermath of the battle. As smoke cleared and the wounded were tended, Willowbend found itself forever changed. The townspeople who had stood and fought together now looked at each other differently, bonded by shared courage and the knowledge that they'd faced down evil and won. Magnolia knelt beside Boone where he sat propped against her porch post, cleaning a graze across his ribs with gentle hands. It's over, she whispered, but they both knew she meant more than just the fight. Not quite, Boone said, catching her hands in his. There's something I need to ask you. Before she could respond, he was struggling to his feet, then dropping to one knee despite his injuries. From his pocket, he produced a simple gold band worn smooth by years of his late wife's wearing, but somehow perfect in its simplicity. Magnolia Fairweather, he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent street. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me a reason to fight, a reason to live, and a reason to believe in tomorrow. Will you marry me? The whole town held its breath. Yvonne Mayer Nightshade, who'd opposed their relationship from the beginning, found himself leaning forward to hear her answer. Magnolia looked down at this giant of a man, this broken warrior who'd found healing in her arms, and felt her heart overflow with a love so fierce it threatened to consume her. Yes, she said. Simply then louder, yes. The cheer that went up from the crowd was spontaneous and heartfelt. Even the church ladies who'd gossiped about them found themselves wiping away tears and applauding. Doc Brennigan broke out a bottle of medicinal whiskey.
Out.
And someone started playing a fiddle. 3 days later, they were married in the same church where the congregation had once condemned their relationship. Reverend Blackthorne, humbled by witnessing their courage during the battle, performed the ceremony with genuine warmth. Magnolia wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, while Boone stood resplendent in a new black suit that strained across his massive shoulders when they exchanged vows. Their words were simple but profound. I promise to love you through the storms, Magnolia said, remembering that first night when they danced in the rain. I promise to be your shelter and your partner in all things, Boone replied, his voice thick with emotion. The kiss they shared sealed more than just their marriage. It was a declaration that love could triumph over loss, that broken hearts could heal stronger than before, and that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin with the worst pain. The reception lasted until dawn, with the whole town celebrating their union. As the sun rose over Willow Bend, Boone and Magnolia slipped away to their home, no longer just her house or his temporary shelter, but truly theirs, in their bedroom, as golden light filtered through lace curtains. They made love as husband and wife, with a tenderness that spoke of forever. When they lay quiet in each other's arms afterward, Magnolia traced lazy patterns on Boone's chest. Do you think she would have approved? She asked softly, thinking of his lost daughter. Boone smiled, remembering Clementine's bright laugh and generous heart. She would have loved you, he said with certainty. She always said I needed someone to keep me honest. And do I keep you honest? You keep me everything, he replied, pulling her closer. Human, whole, happy. Their first year of marriage brought challenges that tested their bond in unexpected ways. The nightmares came first, Boone waking in cold sweats, reliving his daughter's death, or the battle with Morrison's gang. But Magnolia was always there, her touch and whispered reassurances pulling him back from the dark places in his mind. When spring arrived, they faced a different kind of trial. Magnolia missed her monthly courses, and the doctor confirmed what they both hoped and feared. She was carrying Boone's child. The joy was overwhelming, but so was the terror. Both had lost children before, and the prospect of that pain returning seemed almost unbearable. What if something goes wrong? Magnolia whispered one night, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. Then we'll face it together, Boone said firmly, covering her hand with his enormous one. But right now, there's a baby growing inside you. Our baby, and that's a miracle worth celebrating. As her pregnancy progressed, the town watched with unusual interest. The wild love story of Boone and Magnolia had become legend, and their coming child felt like a symbol of hope for everyone who'd fought beside them. Women who'd once crossed the street to avoid the scandalous widow now stopped to offer advice and hand-knitted baby clothes. The birth came on a stormy October night, as if their child wanted to make an entrance worthy of parents who'd found love in a tempest. Doc Brennigan attended the delivery, his weathered hands sure and gentle as he helped bring new life into the world. When their son finally arrived after hours of labor, his first cry was strong and indignant, as if protesting the cold world he'd been thrust into. Boone wept openly as he held the tiny boy, this perfect blend of his features and Magnolia's delicate bone structure. What should we name him? Magnolia asked weakly, exhausted but radiant. Clementine always said if she had a brother she'd want to call him Gabriel, Boone said softly. Said every family needed an angel. Gabriel Steelheart, Magnolia tested the name and smiled. I like it, our little warrior. But their greatest challenge came when Gabriel was 6 months old. Fiva swept through the region, claiming several children in neighboring towns. When their baby fell ill, burning with heat despite the cool spring weather, both parents were transported back to their deepest fears. For 3 days and nights, they took turns holding Gabriel, bathing him in cool water, forcing drops of medicine. Between his tiny lips, Boone prayed to a god he'd always had a complicated relationship with, while Magnolia bargained with forces she didn't understand. "Please," she whispered during the darkest hour of the third night, when Gabriel's breathing seemed to barely stir his chest. "Take anything else, but not him. Not our baby." Boone gathered both his wife and son in his arms, his own tears falling on Gabriel's fevered face. "If love could heal," he said hoarsely, "this boy would be the healthiest child who ever lived." Dawn broke on the fourth day. Gabriel's fever finally broke. His eyes fluttered open, focusing on his parents' faces, and he managed a weak but unmistakable smile. Both Boone and Magnolia collapsed with relief, holding each other and their son, as if they'd never let go again. "We did it," Magnolia sobbed against Boone's chest. "We kept him safe. We're going to keep doing it," Boone promised, his voice fierce with paternal love. "Every day for the rest of our lives." Recovery was slow, but steady, as Gabriel regained his strength. His personality began to emerge, curious like his mother, determined like his father, and possessed of a sunny disposition that seemed to light up every room he entered. 5 years after that terrifying fever, the Steelheart family had become the heart of Willowbend. Gabriel, now a sturdy 6-year-old with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes, was the unofficial mascot of the town. He could often be found helping in his father's blacksmith shop. Boone had given up tracking to stay close to home, or following his mother around as she tended the largest garden. In 3 counties, their love story had rippled outward, inspiring other unlikely matches throughout the region. Doc Brennigan had finally proposed to Widow Goldstream, while even the stern mayor, Nightshade, had softened enough to court the new schoolmarm who'd arrived from back east. On this particular spring morning, Magnolia stood in her kitchen making breakfast while watching through the window as Boone taught Gabriel to ride his first pony, a gentle mare they'd named Rosebud in memory of the daughter who'd brought them together through her tragic loss. "Higher, Papa," Gabriel called out, bouncing enthusiastically in the saddle. "Easy there, little man," Boone laughed, his massive hands steady on the reins. Rosebud still getting used to carrying such an important passenger. The sight of her husband and son together never failed to fill Magnolia's heart to overflowing. Boone had proven to be an extraordinary father, patient, playful, and fiercely protective. Gabriel adored him completely, often trying to copy his father's purposeful stride and measured way of speaking. "Mama," Gabriel called, spotting her at the window. "Look, I'm riding all by myself." She stepped onto the porch, applauding enthusiastically. "You're a natural horseman, sweetheart." As she watched them, her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, where another secret was growing. She hadn't told Boone yet about the new baby. Wanted to be absolutely certain this time before raising hopes. But at 3 months along, she was finally ready to share the news. That evening, after Gabriel had been tucked into bed with his favorite story about brave knights and fair maidens, Magnolia and Boone sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Remember our first storm?" she asked, leaning against his solid warmth. "How could I forget? That was the night I started living again." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "You saved me, Magnolia. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," she corrected, then took a deep breath. "And now we have something else to save our hearts for." It took him a moment to understand, but when he did, his face transformed with wonder and joy. "Another baby? Another baby?" she confirmed, laughing as he swept her up in his arms and spun her around despite her protests about being dizzy. Gabriel's going to be a big brother, he marveled, setting her down gently. "He'll be so excited." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. Instead of answering with words, Boone dropped to his knees and pressed his ear to her stomach, his hands gentle on her waist. "Hello in there, little one," he whispered. "Your papa and mama can't wait to meet you." Later that night, as they lay entwined in their bed, Magnolia reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had begun with unimaginable loss Boone's daughter, her first pregnancy, the lonely years of widowhood. But somehow that pain had carved out space in their hearts for an even deeper love. "What are you thinking about?" Boone asked softly, sensing her contemplation. "Just all of it. How we found each other. How love really can heal everything, given time and patience and the right person to share it with. You think we'll have a daughter this time?" he wondered, his hand resting protectively over their growing child. "Maybe. Would you like that?" "I'd like whatever we're blessed with," he said firmly. "But if it is a daughter, I hope she's exactly like her mama, brave and beautiful and stubborn enough to love a broken-down giant back to life." As sleep began to claim them, wrapped in each other's arms with their son breathing peacefully in the next room and their new baby growing safe and warm between them, Magnolia smiled into the darkness. Their wild love story had begun with desperate grief and a stranger's kindness. But it was ending. If love stories ever truly end with a house full of laughter, a town full of friends, and hearts full of the kind of love that conquers all, the last thing she heard before drifting off was Boone's whispered promise: "Forever and always, my darling. Forever and always." And in Willowbend, where legends were born from the collision of broken hearts and healing hands, everyone knew that some promises were too strong to ever be broken.